I never thought I'd own a house at 33. It wasn't fancy, just a modest two-bedroom with a quaint front porch and a little garden I was proud of. But it was mine. The mortgage was tight on my income as a junior graphic designer, but I'd saved for years to make it happen. Every flower I planted, every coat of paint on the walls, was a piece of me. It was my refuge, quiet, ordered, and mine to control. Being the eldest daughter in my family meant I wasn't a stranger to control slipping out of my grasp. Growing up, my mother had a knack for dividing attention unequally. My younger sister, Clara, had always been her golden child. While I was buried in textbooks, balancing babysitting Clara with chores and homework, she was encouraged to focus on her passions. If she wanted piano lessons, my mother found a way to make it happen. If I wanted to join the school debate team, I was told I'd need to walk home afterward because driving me around wasn't an option. Clara had children young. She was 19 when she married her high school boyfriend, Rob, and their first baby arrived a year later. They had two more in quick succession before their marriage fell apart. Rob wasn't a bad guy, just unprepared to be a father, and Clara leaned hard on my mother after their split. Whenever Clara struggled, which was often, my mother rallied for her, financially and emotionally, even at my expense. I had long accepted that I was the responsible one, the one who didn't ask for help because I knew it wouldn't come. That sense of isolation fueled my drive. By my mid-20s, I was out of the house and living on my own, working tirelessly to save for something that would finally be mine. My house wasn't extravagant, but it symbolized everything I'd built by myself. Visits with my mother and Clara were cordial but strained. My mother had a way of making me feel like my independence was some form of rebellion against the family. "You're so lucky you don't have to think about anyone else," she'd say whenever I visited her and Clara. "Not like us," she'd add with a pointed glance at Clara, who usually nodded solemnly while her kids tore through the room. The truth was, Clara and I weren't close. Growing up, she treated me like a second mom, which made it hard to see her as anything but another responsibility. She never outgrew that dynamic, and it showed. She'd often talk about her chaotic life with a faint air of expectation, as if I might swoop in to save the day. But I'd drawn firm boundaries over the years, and I was determined to keep them intact. I liked my solitude. I liked waking up on Sunday mornings to the sound of birds in my garden instead of the chaos of children screaming for cereal. My little routines made my house feel like a sanctuary. I worked hard, spent my weekends reading, and occasionally hosted friends for dinner. My life wasn't flashy, but it was peaceful. All of that changed the day Clara showed up unannounced. It was a crisp spring morning, and I had just settled down with a cup of coffee and my sketch pad when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Curious, I glanced out the window to see Clara stepping out of her old sedan, her 3 kids piling out after her. My heart sank. She hadn't mentioned a visit, and the sight of the bags she hauled from her trunk set my nerves on edge. By the time I opened the door, Clara was already halfway up the porch steps, her youngest child clinging to her hip. She flashed me a bright, oblivious smile. "Hey, big sis, Mom said it's fine if we stay here for a bit." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "What?" Clara breezed past me into the house, plopping her bags onto the living room floor. "Just for a while," she added, as if that explained anything. The kids trailed after her, already inspecting the furniture and peeking into other rooms. I stood frozen at the doorway, unsure whether to laugh or cry. My quiet sanctuary, my hard-earned home, suddenly felt like it wasn't mine at all. Clara's words hung in the air like a grenade waiting to go off. "Mom said it's fine if we stay here for a bit." I blinked, my fingers tightening around the doorframe. "Stay here? Clara, what are you talking about?" She didn't even look at me as she hoisted her youngest onto her hip and started toward the kitchen. "Just for a little while. The landlord kicked us out. Some nonsense about overdue rent, but I don't have time to argue with him. Mom said you wouldn't mind if we stayed until I got back on my feet." "Mom said—" I stopped myself and inhaled sharply. Of course, Mom said. I followed her into the kitchen, where she was already opening cupboards, as if it were her house. Clara, I wish you had called me first. She interrupted, rummaging through a cabinet. I know you're busy, sis, but I figured this would be easier to explain in person. Besides, you've got all this space. It's just me and the kids. It's not like we're going to take up much room. The sound of something shattering made me jump. One of her kids had knocked over the ceramic vase on my coffee table. I winced as shards scattered across the floor, but Clara barely flinched. Daniel! She called over her shoulder, her tone mildly scolding. Be careful! I don't have a guest room, I said flatly, my voice sharper than I intended. She turned to face me, unfazed, her smile dripping with unearned confidence. That's fine. We'll manage. The couch folds out, right? I stared at her, dumbstruck. My living room wasn't even big enough for her 3 kids to share the pull-out sofa comfortably. But before I could say any of this, Clara's oldest came running into the kitchen. Mom, I'm hungry! Without missing a beat, Clara glanced at me. Do you have cereal or something? They haven't eaten since breakfast. I exhaled slowly, biting back the words bubbling to the surface. Instead, I opened the pantry and handed her a box of cereal. The kids swarmed the counter, chattering loudly, while Clara grabbed bowls like she owned the place. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The first night was chaos. The kids fought over the couch, leaving toys scattered everywhere. Clara barely helped clean up, offering a casual, "Thanks for being such a lifesaver," before retreating to the bedroom with her youngest. I slept poorly, tossing and turning to the sound of my nephew's video game bleeps from the living room. The next morning, Clara was already up and sitting at the table, sipping my coffee, when I stumbled into the kitchen. "Morning," she chirped, like everything was perfectly normal. "I need to talk to you," I said, not bothering to mask my irritation. She looked up, all innocence. "Sure, what's up?" "This isn't going to work, Clara. I need a timeline. How long are you planning to stay?" Her face crumpled in exaggerated dismay. "I don't know. A couple weeks? A month, maybe? You know how hard it is to find a place that'll take kids on short notice? Especially with my budget." "That's what I mean," I said firmly. "If you're staying here, you need to contribute. Rent, groceries, something. I can't handle this on my own." Her expression shifted, her lower lip jutting out in a pout. "Are you serious right now? We just got here, and you're already making demands? Do you have any idea how hard this has been for me?" I pinched the bridge of my nose. "I'm not saying no, Clara. I'm saying I need boundaries. This is my house." She sighed heavily, like I was asking her to move mountains. "Fine, I'll figure something out." But days turned into a week, and nothing changed. She left messes for me to clean, let her kids run wild, and didn't offer so much as $1 for groceries. Every time I tried to bring it up, she deflected with guilt trips or complaints about how hard her life was. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. I came home after a grueling day at work to find Clara sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone, while the kids had turned my living room into a jungle gym. Dirty dishes were piled high in the sink, and the fridge was empty, save for a half-empty milk carton. "Clara," I said, my voice trembling with restrained anger, "I can't do this anymore." She didn't even look up. "Do what?" "Take care of everything. This isn't your house. You need to step up or leave." That finally got her attention. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with mock hurt. "I can't believe you're saying this to me. You know what I'm going through. Mom was right. You're heartless." The words stung, but my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about taking back my life. Clara's words, "Mom was right. You're heartless," echoed in my mind as I sat in my bedroom that night, staring at the ceiling. The house no longer felt like my sanctuary. It was chaotic, noisy, and suffocating, a far cry from the peaceful retreat I'd worked so hard to create. For the next week, tension simmered. Every time I tried to address the situation, Clara found a way to deflect. If I asked her to clean up after her kids, she'd roll her eyes and say, I'll get to it later. When I asked about rent, she'd sigh dramatically and claim she was working on it. Meanwhile, the messes grew, the fridge emptied faster than I could fill it, and the constant noise of her kids made it impossible to concentrate on anything. One afternoon, I came home early to find her lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone while her kids screamed at each other over a broken toy. The TV blared cartoons, and the living room looked like a hurricane had torn through it, spilled juice on the carpet, cookie crumbs on the couch, and toys strewn across every surface. "Clara," I said, my voice tight, "I thought you were going to clean up today." She looked up, her face a mask of annoyance. "I've been busy." "Busy doing what?" She gestured vaguely at her phone. "Job hunting." "Really? Because it looks like you've been scrolling through Facebook." Her expression hardened, and she set her phone down with an exaggerated sigh. "What do you want from me, huh? I'm doing the best I can." "No, Clara, you're not," I shot back. "I'm paying for everything, cleaning up after your kids and working full time. I can't keep doing this. Either you start contributing or you need to leave." Her eyes filled with crocodile tears. "You're unbelievable. Do you have any idea how hard it is to be a single mom? I thought you, of all people, would understand." "Clara, I get that it's hard, but you can't dump your problems on me and expect me to carry everything." Before she could respond, her youngest ran into the room, tugging at her sleeve. "Mommy, I'm hungry." "Go ask your aunt," Clara said, waving him off. "No," I said firmly, crossing my arms. "You're his mother. You feed him." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Clara glared at me, then reluctantly got up and stormed into the kitchen. That night I called our mother. "Mom," I began, struggling to keep the frustration out of my voice. "Clara's been here for 2 weeks, and she's done nothing but take advantage of me. I need you to talk to her." My mother's response was immediate and dismissive. "Oh, honey, you know how hard things are for Clara right now. She's trying her best." "No, she's not," I said, my voice rising. "She's sitting on my couch all day while I work to support her and her kids. This isn't fair." "Life isn't fair," Mom said, her tone sharp. "You're her sister. You're supposed to help her." "Help her? I'm enabling her." "She's your family, and family supports each other," Mom snapped. "You're being selfish, just like always." Selfish. The word hit like a slap. All my life, I'd been the responsible one, the one who cleaned up after everyone else's messes. And now, for setting boundaries in my own home, I was selfish? I ended the call, shaking with anger. The next morning, Clara was back to her usual antics, but this time I decided to take a different approach. Instead of arguing, I documented everything. I took photos of the messes she left behind, kept receipts of every grocery bill, and even recorded a video of her scrolling on her phone while her kids ran wild. The breaking point came a few days later. I came home to find Clara hosting what could only be described as a playdate gone wrong. 4 additional kids were running around my house, screaming and spilling snacks everywhere, while Clara sat at the kitchen table chatting with another mom. "Clara!" I snapped, my voice cutting through the chaos. "What is going on?" She looked up, unfazed. "Oh, I invited some friends over. I didn't think you'd mind." "I do mind," I said, barely containing my fury. "This is my house, not a daycare." "Well, maybe if you had kids, you'd understand," she shot back. That was it. I was done. That night, after the kids were finally asleep, I sat Clara down. "This isn't working," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I've given you 2 weeks, and nothing has changed. If you're not out by the end of the month, I'll have no choice but to evict you." Her jaw dropped. "You wouldn't. Try me." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The next day, I posted everything online. The photos, the receipts, the videos. I shared my story on a local forum asking for advice. The response was overwhelming. Strangers flooded the post with support, offering legal tips and words of encouragement. "Your house, your rules," one person wrote. "Don't let her guilt you into being a doormat," another said. For the first time in weeks, I felt validated. I wasn't heartless, I was standing up for myself. Clara's behavior didn't improve, but now I had a plan. I reached out to a lawyer who confirmed that I had every right to evict her if she refused to leave. Armed with this information, I was ready for the inevitable confrontation. The end of the month couldn't come fast enough. The final weekend of the month arrived, and Clara still hadn't packed a single box. My polite reminders had turned into firm ultimatums, but she brushed them off with the same dismissive attitude she'd had since she'd arrived. "You're not serious," she scoffed when I mentioned the eviction. "You wouldn't throw your own family out on the street." But she underestimated just how serious I was. Sunday morning, I waited until the kids were occupied in the backyard before confronting her. Clara sat in the living room, feet propped on my coffee table, scrolling through her phone as usual. "Clara," I said firmly, standing in the doorway, "today is the last day of the month. I need you and the kids out by tonight." She didn't even look up. Yeah, I'll get to it." "No, you'll get to it now," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to finally make her glance at me. "I've given you plenty of time to figure this out. I even helped you, but you've done nothing. So as of tomorrow, you no longer have a right to stay here." Her eyes narrowed, and she set her phone down. "Are you kidding me? Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my responsibility anymore," I said, my tone steady. "I've tried to help, but you've taken advantage of my kindness. It's over, Clara." The tears came quickly, her usual weapon. "You're unbelievable," she said, her voice cracking. "You know how hard this has been for me, and you're just throwing me out? What kind of sister does that?" "The kind who's done being a doormat," I replied. The doorbell rang before she could retort, and I took a deep breath. It was the moving truck I'd arranged, just in case she decided to play the helpless card again. I'd hired movers to help her pack and clear out her things. Clara stood up, glaring at me. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." The movers entered, and I handed them instructions. "Everything in the guest room, the kids' stuff in the living room, and anything else they've brought, it all goes." Clara's outrage turned to panic as the movers got to work. "This is insane! You can't do this!" "I can, and I am," I said, crossing my arms. She ran to her phone, likely to call our mother, and I didn't stop her. I knew that call was coming. Sure enough, my phone rang 10 minutes later. Mom's voice was livid. "How could you do this, Rebecca? Your sister is in tears. She said you're kicking her out with no warning." "She's had a month, Mom," I said calmly. I've reminded her every week. She chose to ignore me. "She has nowhere to go." "Then maybe you should let her stay with you," I shot back. Mom faltered. "You know that's not an option." "And why is that? Because you don't want to deal with this mess either? Well, I'm done being the fallback plan. Clara can figure it out just like I did." "You're being heartless." "No, I'm setting boundaries," I said firmly. "If you can't understand that, it's your problem, not mine." I hung up before she could argue further. Meanwhile, the movers worked efficiently, packing Clara's things into boxes and loading them onto the truck. She followed them around, yelling and crying, but they ignored her. By late afternoon, the house was back to the way it had been before she'd arrived, peaceful and orderly. The final box was loaded, and the lead mover handed Clara a clipboard to sign. "Where are we taking this?" he asked. She glared at me, waiting for me to offer a solution. I stared back, unmoved. Finally, she mumbled an address one of her friends, I guessed, and the movers left. Once the truck pulled away, Clara turned to me, her face red with fury. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You'll see. Family's supposed to stick together." "Family's also supposed to respect each other," I replied, holding the door open. "Goodbye, Clara." She stormed out, her kids trailing after her, and I shut the door behind them. For the first time in a month, the house was silent. I stood in the living room, letting the quiet settle over me like a balm. It felt like my home again. I posted an update online that night, thanking everyone for their advice and support. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with people praising me for standing up for myself. One comment stood out. "You did the right thing. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that protect your peace." I slept soundly that night, knowing I'd done just that. The days following Clara's departure felt surreal. The silence in my home was almost disorienting at first, but it didn't take long for the weight of her presence to lift entirely. My house was mine again. No more spilled juice on the carpet, no more dirty dishes piling up, and no more chaos echoing through the walls. I could finally breathe. I spent the first weekend cleaning and restoring the space. It wasn't just about tidying up. It felt symbolic, reclaiming my sanctuary piece by piece. I shampooed the carpet, rearranged the furniture, and even bought a new vase to replace the one Clara's kids had shattered. By Sunday evening, the house gleamed, and for the first time in weeks, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine, savoring the peace. Of course, my mother didn't let things go so easily. She called several times, each conversation a variation of the same lecture. "You've driven a wedge in this family," she said during one call. "Do you know how hurt Clara is?" "She'll get over it," I replied, unbothered. I gave her more time and help than she deserved. I'm done apologizing for setting boundaries. "You'll regret this one day, Rebecca," she snapped. "Mark my words." But I didn't regret it. If anything, I felt proud of myself for finally standing up for what I deserved. A week later, Clara texted me out of the blue. "Just wanted you to know we're fine. The kids are fine. Thanks for nothing." I stared at the message, a mix of relief and frustration bubbling up. Fine, she was fine. That was all I needed to know. I didn't reply. Life slowly returned to normal. Work was busy but fulfilling, and my evenings were once again my own. I started cooking proper meals instead of relying on takeout, indulged in long baths, and even picked up painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned during Clara's stay. One afternoon, I bumped into an old college friend, Maya, at the grocery store. We hadn't seen each other in years, and catching up over coffee felt like reconnecting with a piece of my past. Maya had always been a voice of reason, and when I told her about the ordeal with Clara, she nodded sagely. "Good for you," she said, stirring her latte. "It takes guts to stand up to family, especially when they're used to walking all over you." "I wish it didn't have to come to that," I admitted, "but I couldn't keep living like that." "Sometimes protecting your peace means making hard choices," she said with a smile. "You did the right thing." Maya's words stuck with me. For so long, I'd let guilt and obligation dictate my actions. But this time, I'd chosen myself, and the world hadn't ended. Months passed, and though Clara and I weren't exactly on speaking terms, I occasionally heard updates through our mother. Clara had moved into a small apartment with help from a friend, and though she was still struggling, she'd found a part-time job to make ends meet. "She's doing her best," Mom said one evening when she called, "but she misses you. Maybe you should reach out." I knew what Mom was really asking, for me to fix things, to bridge the gap I hadn't created, but I wasn't ready to forget how easily Clara had dismissed my boundaries. "I'm glad she's doing better," I said, sidestepping the suggestion. In truth, I wasn't angry anymore. If anything, I felt sorry for Clara. She'd spent her life relying on others, never learning to stand on her own. But I wasn't her savior, and I couldn't be the crutch she leaned on forever. Instead, I focused on myself, strengthening the boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish. My house was peaceful again, my life was back on track, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. A year after Clara left, my life looked completely different. My home remained my sanctuary, but now it buzzed with laughter and warmth, not from chaos, but from new friendships and a blossoming romance with someone who appreciated my independence. Clara and I spoke sparingly. She'd reached out with a tentative apology months ago, acknowledging that she had taken advantage of me. While I accepted her apology, I kept our relationship at arm's length. It wasn't about holding a grudge, it was about protecting the peace I had worked so hard to restore. On a quiet Sunday morning, as I sipped coffee on my porch, I reflected on how far I'd come. Setting boundaries wasn't just about saying no, it was about saying yes to myself, my house, my life, my peace. I'd earned it, and I wasn't letting it go.